It's funny, even when you get older, you sometimes get a shake in your hand. And my poor daughter, when she saw me shaking when I picked up my cup of tea, she said, "Oh, Mom!" But we can't stop getting older, you know? Okay, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. My name now is Magdalena Thomas because I'm an Orthodox Christian. But when I was born, I was Diane. That was the name my mother gave me, Diane. And then the church said, you have to add a Marie because Diane is not a saint's name. I was born and brought up in the Catholic Church. So I was Diane Marie Souza. Souza was my last name because my father's family was from the Azores in Portugal. And my mother's family were from Ireland. And actually my grandmother's family on my father's side, they were from England, but actually I think they were Irish. That was the story I heard. They were Irish, and in those days it was very dangerous to be Irish. There were signs up saying Irish need not apply for jobs. So they never talked about being from Ireland, but my aunt told me before she died that we were really Irish on both sides. So anyway, I was born, and when I was born into my family, my mother and father already had 2 boys. They were 5 and 12 years older than me, so they were spread out. And then I was born, and my mother was so happy to have a girl. And I did end up having another brother, so there were 3 boys and 1 girl. He was 7 years younger, and I loved him to bits. I used to love pushing him in his carriage and taking care of him. So I went to parochial school with 12 years of the Sisters of Notre Dame, who wore their habits in those days, and they were very serious about their responsibility in being teachers. You just had 1 teacher for all your classes. And I can say that they really taught me to love God. They really taught me about God. So I was blessed in that I grew up in a Christian family, Catholic, that taught me about God. Especially today, I see what a blessing that is. So now I'm in my 75th year of my life, which means I'm not yet 75. I won't be 75 until September. So some of the highlights of my growing up years was that we never had gym in school because there was no gym, but we did have a drum and bugle corps, and it was dedicated to the Mother of God, to her Annunciation. So we were called the Annunciators. And we had a little icon of the Mother of God on the front of our uniforms. And we were a very good drum and bugle corps. And the reason I tell you about the drum and bugle corps is that's where I met my husband. So he was not going to St. Mary's, but the drum and bugle corps was open to anybody. He was Catholic. But now I realize not really a practicing Catholic. And I didn't realize that at the time. So we dated for 4 years. He played the French horn, and I carried the Irish flag. We marched in contests and parades and things together, and we loved the people in the drum and bugle corps. And we were very disciplined when it came to learning how to do that, how to stay in line and march and everything. I still love drum and bugle corps. So then it was also the time of the Vietnam conflict, and there was a draft in the United States about the time we got married. Joe ended up asking me to marry him. So I figured, well, we knew each other for 4 years. We really loved each other, why not? So we decided to get married. It was very sad for my aunts and uncles. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I have a lot of aunts and uncles. And I forgot to tell you, I grew up living first in my grandmother's house, which she had 12 children, and my father was the oldest of the 12. So in the house I lived in first until I was 5, there was my family on the second floor, my grandmother and grandfather on the first floor, all their children that hadn't married up in the attic. And the ones that were married was my family, and down in the basement was Kenny and Allie with their 3 children. So it was a pretty big house, and it was full of people. And as the years went on, more and more grandchildren came, and I ended up having 51 first cousins. So they weren't all in the house at that time. But anyway, I grew up in a big family. So when we got married, all the aunts and uncles were at the wedding. It was this big deal. And I remember the air conditioning went, and it was on July 2nd. It was really hot. But I didn't care. I was getting married and I was happy. So we got married, and then they sent him off to first training in Rantoul, Illinois, so I lived with them there. But then from Rantoul they sent him off to Guam, an island in the Pacific, about 10,000 miles from Boston. But I wanted to be with him, and nothing was stopping me, so I saved up my pennies from my job. I had a job at John Hancock Life Insurance Company, and it was almost $1,000 to fly to Guam then. But I did. I got on the plane and I flew to Guam, and I never knew what to expect. It's funny, I was really young, and I didn't think you needed to know what to expect. But when I got off the plane and I saw that there really was no airport there for civilians, you just landed and there wasn't anything else. And the humidity was incredible. But I was glad to be on Guam, and Joe had found an apartment in a house in Dee-Dee-Doo was the village that we were. So we went to live in Dee-Dee-Doo, and then they sent him off on a secret mission that I found out years later was in Udon, Thailand. And I guess we weren't supposed to be in Udon, Thailand at that time. But he went there on the mission, and I was waiting for him to come back, and I had no way of knowing how I could complain, because it had been weeks and then months, and he was gone, and no letters. I kept going to check for letters and things. Anyway, he did come back eventually, but he was a changed person, and it was very hard for him, the transition. And well, we finished our time in Guam together, and then they gave him an honorable discharge, and he was out of the Air Force. So then we went to Lowell, Massachusetts, because he was going to school at the university in Lowell Tech. Anyway, while he was in the university, Allison was born, and she was so cute. We lived in a housing project, and I remember the Greek ladies used to come and try to tell me how to take care of my daughter, because they could see I could use a little bit of support. It was about an hour's drive from Boston, and my mother didn't drive, so I didn't get a lot of visitors from my family. Although my godmother did visit me. I started to realize that the marriage wasn't working out. And there was something that happened that made me realize I had to take a stand. So I said to him, maybe we should separate for a while. He was glad. He was wanting to do that. And so I was thinking it would be just for a little while, but it turned out to be that he said, well, how about January 1st, 1971? I'll just, I'll leave on that day. And so we planned it, and that day he got up and he packed his things, and I remember I was sitting in the living room and she was in the playpen, because we used playpens to keep him in those days, and he turned around and he said, take good care of the baby, and he closed the door and left. And that was the end of the support that I needed at that time from him. I'm sorry to say that I became very, very depressed. I went to counseling, and the person that was counseling with me said that she thought I would make a great nurse. And so I went to nursing school, and that was good for me. And I wanted to take care of babies, but I ended up first working in the New England Baptist Hospital, where they had the first total hip replacements in America. And I helped to take care of patients that had total hip replacements. I did end up going to work with the newborns at Boston Lyme-In Hospital, and that was wonderful, feeding all those little babies. So nursing was very good medicine for me. And my daughter, she was such a good daughter. We had to have somebody come in and live with us so that I could go to work at night. But she would go to school in the morning. I would go to sleep. She would come home and cook supper. She was about 10 years old when she was doing this. And that's how our life was for a while. And then we moved out of Boston. We moved to Syracuse. And we moved to Syracuse because in Boston I had found a Christian community. It was just what I needed. It was called the Holy Order of Man's Christian Community, and they had a storefront on Comm Ave in Boston, and that's where the chapel was. And I went there, and I got a lot of support from the people in the community. You know, we really need each other, and it's so good that the church does have communities. I remember there was a woman that kind of adopted my daughter like a grandmother. Oh, my mother had died. My mother died of Alzheimer's when she was only 62. So this priest that I really loved, he ended up going to Syracuse to start another Christian community in Syracuse, and actually it still exists. It's Father Philip McCaffrey. But in the meantime, this is really interesting. In the meantime, somebody from Holy Trinity Monastery met up with the Holy Order of Man's in California and explained to them that it wasn't really the true church, and that he knew about the true church, and that it would be really good if people would realize that and come over to the true church. So the year that the Holy Order of Man's ended up joining with the Orthodox Church, it was the year after a Protestant group did the year before, but there were a lot of us, including in Holland and Europe. We all joined the Orthodox Church. It was Father Herman, who also knew Father Seraphim, and that whole group got together. So that was back then. So that's why I came to Syracuse to be with Father Philip. And that was wonderful too. And by now, my daughter is older, and she ends up pregnant and decides to marry the father of the baby. And we were living in a mobile home in Syracuse. We lived there for about 18 years. And I was so glad my father came to visit that year, because it was the last time I saw him, actually. But my grandson was born, and Jeremy is his name, and he taught Jeremy how to laugh. He would take his hand and shake it and say, "How you doing?" Jeremy was 1 month old, but I swear that baby was able to laugh at 1 month old. And so that was a good thing. He ended up dying after that. It was funny, when he went off in the airport, I said to myself, I wonder if I'm ever going to see my father again, but I thought it was just a funny thought. He was 72 then. But Pascha came, and when Pascha came, he asked me if I was going to come to Boston, and I said, I don't know. Dad, I'll call you when I get home from church. From work. I went to work then. And when I got home from work, I walked in and the phone was ringing. It was 11:30 or 12 o'clock, and I thought it was my father. But when I answered, it was my brother. And my brother said, Daddy died today. So that was how my father passed. So that's interesting. I didn't have my mother or father, so it was time for the new life in Syracuse. And the Christian community in the Holy Order of Nuns, in a sense, brought me to Orthodoxy, but not just them. I remember now that I didn't go right away to the Orthodox Church, because I went back to the Catholic Church for a while, because I wanted to, even though Father Philip and them, they were already getting baptized, I wasn't yet ready. It's funny, it takes a long time sometimes for people to be baptized. And I understand that now for myself. He became off, but the way I found it is kind of interesting. I was with the Catholic Church still, because I wasn't yet ready to let go. It takes a long time sometimes. And that group decided they were going to take a trip to Medjugorje. That's why I had to tell you about Medjugorje. Because I went to Medjugorje with the group from the church, and that's in Serbia and Croatia, actually. And it was a wonderful visit. The Mother of God's presence was amazing. But the people I went with only stayed 1 week. And they left, and I had booked my ticket for 2 weeks, so I had a week alone. And I decided after they left that I wanted to go to Mostar, the nearest town, because I heard they had an 800-year-old bridge, and I just wanted to see a little bit of the countryside. And when I went there, I found myself looking up for a cupola. I wanted to go to an Orthodox church, and I believe the Mother of God was leading me to the Orthodox church at that time. So I finally found a church, but it was closed, and I was exhausted because I had gotten sick after they left. And so I laid down on a bench and fell asleep, and when I woke up, it was open, and there were people walking in the door. And I walked in, and I saw they had this little stand on the side, and everybody was going over there to get something, but there were no benches. And I remember thinking they must be renovating or something. Anyway, I went over to the candle stand, I guess that's what it was, and I bought all these paper icons of St. George and several other saints. So I had these icons all rolled up under my arm, and then whatever they were saying in the church I couldn't understand, so I just left with the icons. And when I was coming back from Medjugorje, in the airport in Belgrade, I saw some priest monks sitting together. So I went up to them, and I said, Dober den, because I had learned how to say that. And they ignored me, and then I said it again, and one of them said, are you talking to us? They were from America, so they were Americans, but they were dressed up like priest monks, because they were. It was Father Simeon Gitlis from Boscobel, Wisconsin, who, by the way, at one time had the largest icon business in the United States. You can get almost any icon you want there. So he was just beginning his business, and he was gathering icons. So I showed him the ones I had, but I told him I was Catholic. And he said, okay, tell me a little bit about that, and I did. And then I realized he was a really special person that was sent to me. It was a gift to meet him. So I had read this book. This is the funny thing. I asked him first to be my spiritual father, because in this book it said it's good to have a spiritual father if you want to say the Jesus prayer. I got the book at the bedside of my friends that were going to a conference and asked me to take care of their mother. So I was taking care of their mother, and there was this little book called The Way of the Pilgrim on the bedside table. So I picked it up and read the whole book from the beginning to the end while I was there that weekend. And I loved it. I loved doing the Jesus prayer, but it said in it that you need a spiritual father to guide you. So then I went to Medjugorje. So now here I am in the airplane flying across the ocean with Father Simeon next to me. So I said, Father Simeon, would you be my spiritual father? And he said, well, I'm Orthodox and you're Catholic. And I said, that's okay. And he said, okay, I'll be your spiritual father. And he says, I have an assignment for you. And I said, what's that? And he said, I want you to read a little book called The Way of the Pilgrim. And so he was a big help to me. It took years. It took a couple of years, maybe even 5, before I became Orthodox. And I used to take trips to Boscobel, Wisconsin. Anybody that's Catholic knows that sometimes it takes a long time to leave the Catholic religion, because it's very strong, a very strong part of a person. But you have to realize it's not the true religion before you can leave it. You know, it doesn't have the whole truth. The Orthodox Church does. I know that now, but I didn't know it then. So I would go and visit him. He never once asked me to become Orthodox, and I kept going back and forth. He would even let me borrow their car and go to the town in Boscobel and go to the Catholic Church, because I still wanted to go to the Catholic Church. But he introduced me to all the icons in his little church, and eventually I really, really wanted to be Orthodox. So the last time I went to visit him, I thought it was the last time I was not Orthodox. I said, Father Simeon, I decided I want to be Orthodox. And he says, you're like a ripe apple falling off a tree. And so he baptized me. He said, not this visit, but come again around before Pascha, and I'll baptize you then. So he baptized me. And what year was that? That was baptized in 1993. I was baptized by Father Simeon Gitlis in Boscobel, Wisconsin. That was there was somebody else that introduced me to Orthodoxy. It was years after I went through the divorce with Joe, and I met Angelo, and we were both Catholic, and he one day we were engaged. I was engaged to be married to him, and one day he said to me, I think we should take a ride to Jordanville. I said, why? He said, this is beautiful monastery there. You've got to see it. I heard about it. Let's just go take a ride there. So we took a ride. And we came to Jordanville, and it was in the summer. It was before I was baptized. So I would say, I'm not sure, but maybe 1991 or something. Anyway, who cares about dates? So we had the place for the reception and the whole wedding planned out and everything. I don't remember if we sent the invitations or not, but I walked up to the church. It was like I was in heaven. It was so beautiful. You know how beautiful the gardens are that Mary and Catherine do. And it was so beautiful outside, and when I walked inside, the choir was singing in Slavonic, and there was nobody else in the church. So they just ignored me, and we walked into the church. I walked right up to St. John of Kronstadt. I didn't know who he was. And I said to him, I don't know what your name is, but I can tell you're a wonderful saint. And I said, I'm about to get married a second time, and I don't want to make another mistake. So I said, I thought I was just going to ask him to bless it. So I said, would you please bless our marriage if it's God's will? And if it's not God's will, blow it to pieces. Well, he blew it to pieces, because Angelo drove me back home, and in those days we had answering machines, but we didn't have cell phones. And he didn't call, and he didn't call, and he didn't call, and I thought, I better give him some space and find out what's up. And eventually he left a message on my machine, and he said, I'm sorry, I can't marry you because I don't really love you. And I was crushed at the time, but that was, I'm sure it was a gift from St. John. He blew it to pieces. And it was a great thing not to go through a bad marriage again. And my parents had a bad marriage, and they stuck it out. They never got divorced. But that was not great to grow up in either, as I know a lot of people who've grown up in, 95% of families have difficulties. There aren't any perfect families, maybe a few, but for the most part, every family struggles. So I recovered from that, and I really saw it as a gift from God, and I guess that's what helped me to become Orthodox, because then with Father Simeon and everything, and all those experiences coming and seeing Jordanville, I decided I wanted to be baptized. So Father Simeon baptized me. And Father Manas, who went to be with Father Ephraim, he was there, and he was singing in the choir when I was baptized. So that, it's really amazing to, when I think of my life, how God really took care of me. And then, as soon as I became Orthodox, I had this incredible desire, I didn't know it, to go to the Holy Land. And so I was baptized in 93. In 95, I was still living in Syracuse, but I was coming to Jordanville for services every weekend. And that weekend that I came, everybody was saying there was going to be a pilgrimage with Vladika Hilarion. Yeah, it was Vladika Hilarion, to the Holy Land. And I said to the secretary then, who is the Bishop of Mid-America now, I can't think of his name. I'm terrible with names. I know him well. I told him, I said, is there any way I can go on that trip to the Holy Land? And he says, well, it's in 2 weeks. I said, I know, I'm ready. So he said, all right. He brought me in his office, and I paid him the money. He made my reservation for the airplane. It was easy in those days to go places. There was nothing to worry about. You just paid the money, and you got on the plane, and you went. So that was life-changing, to go to the Holy Land and to travel with Vladika Hilarion. He was wonderful. And to go to all those holy places. And that just made me think, I've got to come back again. And so I ended up going to the Holy Land again and again in 95 and 98, and 5 times altogether I went. And the last time I went was in 2005, because when I was there the first time, I met somebody who said that she was living there for 6 months. And I said, boy, that's what you need to do. You need to live here if you have this much of a desire to be at the Holy Sepulchre. And so I prayed to, I was, when we went to, there's a school in Bethany. When I went to Bethany, the icon of St. Lazarus, I prayed to St. Lazarus. I said, St. Lazarus, if it's possible, could you help me to come back to the Holy Land and live here? It never dawned on me until just now that that prayer was at Bethany. And when I got the call from Mother Agapia one day when I had just come back from church in the morning, I got a call from Mother Agapia, and she said, how would you like to come and live in the Holy Land for 6 months? And I said, oh, I would love that. And she says, you're going to take care of a little Palestinian child. Her crib will be in your room. I said, oh, that sounds wonderful. So that's what I did. I went and I lived there for 6 months. It was a great, great blessing. I used to love to go to the Holy Sepulchre on my days off and just sit there outside of it and just feel the grace. You know what I mean. Well, you know what? Today reminded me of the Holy Land. Being in our church with so many holy people, Orthodox Christians all together. And at the Feast of the Precious Cross, there was a lot of grace in the church today. And we all had communion. What more could we want? I don't feel the desire to travel so much anymore now that I'm older. So I think that's pretty much my life, unless you have any other questions. Oh, what does it mean to be Orthodox? It means you have found the true faith. You have received the heavenly spirit. You know that Tropar. I forget the rest of it right now, but it's like abiding in the true faith, with one foot still on the earth because I am on the earth, and the other foot in heaven. That's what it feels like to be Orthodox. It's also a challenge to be Orthodox. Oh, I think everybody has a mission. To live Orthodoxy as best I can, and it's harder when you get older. It is harder. I remember when I first came here to live, I forgot to tell about that. I ended up coming to Jordanville to live, and I bought a house here, and now I've been here for 20 years. So I've met a lot of seminarians and priests, and it's wonderful. It's a great, great place to live. At first I wanted to just be in church as much as possible, and I was going every day. And by the way, I did that when I was a little girl as a Catholic too. It was hard, but a very dear friend, Mother Agapia, the one who called me to invite me to go to the Holy Land, she was here then. She had the services, you know how you could buy each service for each day. She had them all, and when I would come in church, she will have already read it downstairs in no time because she reads fast, and she just handed it to me, and I have the service in front of me in English, so I could follow as long as she was there. And then gradually I learned to hold my prayer book and look at, you know, I had the Old Believers prayer book for a while, but even with just the English, I think it's easiest with the English because you're only reading one language, but you can read that language and you can hear what the people are saying. And it's repeated a lot in the liturgy, and if you keep going, you hear it again and again and again. So after a while, it became translated for me. I still would read it because there's something about reading it that really makes it come into your soul and your heart when you're taken in with your eyes, and it keeps you from wandering when you're in church. I guess I did a little bit. I sing the creed in Slavonic when we sing it in church. I sing the Our Father in Slavonic. And I love both the Russians and the Greeks because they both had a big part in my experience of Orthodoxy. I used to go to Holy Protection Monastery before. We couldn't go there a lot. My spiritual mother is there, Abbess Olympiada. And so I love the Greeks. I love monastics in general, and priests, and, you know, holy people in general. And you can't help but take in some of their culture, you know. So I think I've become a little bit Russian, and maybe a little bit Greek too, because it's all part of it, you know. And I do love both cultures. They're different. I have to admit, the first time I came to Jordanville, it was hard. The first time I came to Jordanville by myself, which was probably a mistake. I should have come with a friend. I don't know why I did that. But I knew where it was, so I just drove here, and I can't even tell you if I was yet Orthodox at that time. Anyway, nobody spoke to me. It wasn't like it is now. Right now, well, it's very open, and there's a friendliness that permeates the monastery. But back then, everybody spoke Russian, and so they spoke Russian to each other, and that cut me off from anything that they were saying. And I always thought that when you were new in a church, people should at least say hello. So when I first came, I think I went to Father Gregory Nomenko and his wife and said, "I'm never going back to Jordanville again." And I said, "Why not?" And I said, "It's a beautiful place, but nobody talks to you there. They just speak Russian to each other." But as you can see, it's changed quite a bit now. Isn't that nice? We're really integrated with each other now. I ended up, I didn't stop going. Father Gregory said, well, you can always come to Rochester if you want. They didn't even have their big church then. But I didn't do that. I think the Holy Spirit helped me to get over it. I just kept coming back. And then I met Bishop, well, he wasn't a bishop then, Father George Schaefer and Father Averki. They were here then. And they had, you could see that they were trying to bring me in and help me to feel comfortable and everything. Oh, and then my grandchildren, my 3 grandchildren were baptized. 2 of them were baptized at St. Mary's Church in Syracuse, because I went there. Yeah, I went to St. Mary's because I was working at the hospital in Syracuse. That's why. 5 years in Syracuse, and then I moved here. And then I started to work at the hospital in Cooperstown. And I did psychiatric nursing for a lot of time because I really understood about depression and anxiety and things like that, because I had been through it myself. So anyway, it didn't take long before there were many people that would be very friendly. You know, I can't really remember, but I don't think it was too long, maybe a matter of months, a couple of months probably. I mean, if you meet people like Father George Schaefer, by the way, he became my spiritual father. I left Father Simeon Gitlis, and Father George said he would be my spiritual father. So it was wonderful, wonderful having him as a spiritual father. And I'm happy for the people in Australia that they have him now, because he is a wonderful guide and he really cares. But yeah, little by little, the community grew. I did try out oh, this is too long. I'll just say that I tried monasticism several times in my life. In Boscobel, Wisconsin, here at the Sisterhood in Syracuse. And it just didn't work out. I think it's not meant for everybody. I mean, you can really, really love God. And when you really love God, it seems like you want to do the ultimate. You want to give your whole life to God. And that is a wonderful thing to do. But I found out I didn't have the strength for it. The psychological strength. It takes, it's a lot to be a monastic. Even, I never was a monastic, I was only a poslushnica. And just living there. And I loved it. And I was going to ask to be made a novice, but one of the sisters who's no longer there said, "Oh, Magdalena, didn't you realize?" And I said, "Realize what?" We were all praying that you'd realize it just isn't working. It felt like I was going through the divorce all over again. I ran to Elizabeth Markwood's house, which is uninhabited now, but someday she'll be back with her family. And I just cried and cried and cried. But I still feel like God has me where he wants me, right here. So some of us have the strength to be monastics and some don't. And God can accept many different kinds of people. All of us. We're all his children. I think I'm an outgoing person. And so I want to tell everybody about Orthodoxy. I do. I have to hold myself back because some people are not ready to hear it. But it gives me such joy when I see new people coming into the church. Such joy. That's the best. Well, yeah, I think the different cultures express it differently. I think the Greek culture is softer than the Russian culture. So, but that could be, that's just my thought on it. I don't even know. But the Greek monastery, it feels very warm and very friendly. Even though they have all their rules there, you have to be careful that you stay by what they expect while you're staying there, No, I not once you get to know him, but of course my first impression was that. That's probably the impression. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I just remembered that when I was at St. Mary's Church, which is one of our churches in Syracuse with Father Nikolai, they had a movie of the Tsar and his family and how they were murdered. And it was all in Russian. Nobody was translating it for me, but I mean, you can watch, you can get a sense of what's going on. So I went to that, and I started to cry, and I couldn't stop crying, and I couldn't stop crying. And I went up to Father Nikolai, and I said, you know what? I said, it was it was so clear to me today when I saw the Tsar and his family going through their martyrdom that they died for people like me to find orthodoxy. I really believe that. I really believe that. You know, it's their sacrifice. Their lives were for all the people that weren't Orthodox, because Orthodoxy is the true faith. That I know for sure. Saint Mary Magdalene. That's easy. But I have lots of other saints I really love. The life is an example. Saint Elizabeth, I guess. And it's interesting, my daughter and my son-in-law also became Orthodox 10 years ago, and Allison took the name Elizabeth. I gave her the life of Grand Duchess Elizabeth, and she read it, and she said, that's it. That's who I want to be named after. So that's the other saint I love a lot. Unfortunately, my great-grandchildren, as of yet, are not Orthodox, because Jeremy, my grandson, is with Emily, who has had no experience of any church. And so she doesn't want her children to be involved in anything that she's not part of. And she's not willing to check out the church right now in her life. She's still young. She's in her 20s now. So when I look at my whole life, I guess anything could happen, and that could change. And that's my biggest prayer. So I try not to fight her about that. But it's very hard. It's very hard because Abigail and Scarlett are 5 and 7. And I see the children in the church that are 5 and 7. They're really experiencing the Orthodox Church. You can see how they love the church. Even though they might have trouble staying still sometimes, for the most part, it's a gift that they're experiencing right from the beginning, which is the best, and having communion. And of course I want that for my great-grandchildren. But their mother doesn't want it. So I sent them both the children's prayer book that they have 2 children's prayer books, little ones with animals in them and everything, and about praying and everything. I sent them in the mail. I figured that might be a non-threatening way to give them something with the church. And their mother handed them to them, and they opened them. And she said, I'll keep them now until you grow up, and then you can have them. So that's very hard. Unfortunately, because the Catholics haven't stuck by the true teachings of the Church, it's losing the truth of the Christianity that it is trying to give to people. Now, when I was a child, I felt like when I had communion, I really had communion. But when they were starting already after the Ecumenical Council, they started to let people in the church, lay people, give out the host and things and put it in people's hands. Those kind of things take the grace away. I'm not a theologian, and I'm certainly not God. It's for God to discern about that. But I figure the way it's going is just going further and further away from God. But when I was younger, it was very strong. I had my prayer book and I read it in church, and I knew it was all in Latin. So I got used to Latin when I was little, but I would follow on the English side. No, it deepened. It deepened quite a bit, yeah. It became more personal and closer to God. I don't know how else to explain it. It's like more than you could ever ask or imagine. It's the greatest gift that God can give, the true faith. Well, Vladika Lavra was a very wonderful, wonderful, quiet, accessible bishop. I remember when they made him the Metropolitan, he came back and I said, Vladika, what do we call you now? You're Metropolitan. He said, Vladika. Because he was so humble. He was really humble. What a sweet, sweet person he was. And I believe he really was very, very close to God. We have no idea of how close, because we don't know how to discern those things. But he didn't talk about it a lot. However, one time I had a dream, and in that dream, I don't remember how it was shown to me, but it was right after my father died. Maybe it had to do with my father dying, because I also had a dream when my father died. And I know we're not supposed to pay any attention to dreams, but when my father died, the night before he died, I had a dream that we were on the street I grew up on in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he was riding a bicycle. And I knew he had congestive heart failure because I knew he had swelling in his ankles from knowing him. And I ran up to him and I said, Dad, get off that bike. You shouldn't be riding a bike. You have congestive heart failure. And he looked at me in the dream, and when he looked at me and we made eye contact, I knew I had to let go. And so he drove off into the sunset like E.T. What can I say? This is how dreams are, you know. But the next day, when I came home and I got that call from my brother, it was true. And that dream was the night before he died. And when I woke up, I don't want to sound like I have these dreams or these special, please don't think I have anything special, but when I woke up, I heard a voice say, your father's going to die. And he did die that day. So what does that have to do with what you were saying? The people here. Oh, Vladika. That one time with Vladika, I also had another dream, and now I'm starting to believe my dream. Vladika Lavra, yeah, I'm starting to believe my dreams, and I had another dream years later. But in it, it said I was going to die. So I ran up to Vladika from the church to the trapeza so I could ask him this. I said, Vladika, I had this dream that I'm going to die. He stopped in his tracks. He got quiet, closed his eyes, and then he opened his eyes. He says, no, not now, later. That's how he was humble. See how he was humble? I told you all this detail about the dream with my father. He didn't tell me any of that. He just said, no, you're not going to die now. You're going to die later. I believe he was clairvoyant. And he was just so wonderful. He loved everybody. It wasn't like some people were special to him and some weren't. Well, none of the priests are like that, but he was especially loving towards everybody, even people that were a little bit sick or something emotionally, you know.